just put a quick spoiler warning here just in case. I do talk about the series in entirety and up to date, so that includes season 1 to season 3, the movie, and the manga. I don't really talk about the movie and manga as much though, I kind of just mention them, and I don't really talk about any specifics regarding the events of the series overall. But just in case, if you haven't been up to date with the series or you haven't seen the series, of which I highly recommend you do so before watching this to understand what's being discussed, there's a potential for spoilers. Yeah. Okay. I'm pretty sure most Bungou Stray Dog fans understand this scenario. Talking to someone, whether it's a friend or acquaintance, about anime recommendations, and being the Bungou Stray Dog fan that you are, you say, "I highly recommend Bungou Stray Dogs." The person you're talking to considers your suggestion, but asks the golden question, "What is it about?" At that very moment, your brain pauses. It's not that you were caught off guard by the question, or maybe you were, who knows. But what exactly are you going to tell them? An orphan with special powers gets adopted by members of a detective agency who also have special powers? A detective agency against the mafia? The mafia and detective agency versus an American group whose members also have special powers? All of the above against a Russian group with special powers? You haven't even mentioned the movie plot. Granted, the movie's excusable, given that most anime movies can stand on their own, but there seems to be no way to quickly summarize the past 3 seasons of Bungou Stray Dogs. No matter how much you can love the series, giving a summary about it is really problematic. Describing each character is much easier than describing the plot, and stretching it a bit more, it can be easier to describe the connection of each character to one another. But the plot is literally a whole other story. Yes, you can start with the very beginning scene of the series, but finding a clear, simple path that sums up the story's storyline is near impossible. There doesn't even seem to be a good place to stop the summary. The summary on Netflix, IMDb, and other show websites only summarize episode 1, which is a good hook to get people into the series, but doesn't quite give an overview of the series as a whole. So why is it that we just cannot explain Bungou Stray Dogs, even if we were threatened at gunpoint with our life on the line? Well, it's because of the structure of the series. Bungou Stray Dogs is compiled of subplots, or smaller parts of a story that may or may not lead up to the main plot. Season 1 is the most evident of being comprised of subplots. Most of the episodes are coupled in a way that introduces each character of the armed detective agency, along with most of the main Port Mafia members. The first 2 episodes focus on Atsushi and his origin story of joining the detective agency. Episode 3 and 4 kinda shift to introduce Akutagawa and arguably some of the other recurring characters from the Port Mafia, or simply introducing the Port Mafia as the main antagonist of the story so far. Episode 5 focuses on Rampo. Episodes 6 and 7 focus on Kunikira, though these episodes are based off of Dazai's entrance exam light novel. Episode 8 focuses on Yasuno for a while, then introduces Kyoka, and arguably Kaji. Episode 9 focuses on Kyoka, Atsushi, and Akutagawa later on, and part of the episode introduces Chuya. Episode 10 splits between Dazai and Chuya, then Kyoka, Atsushi, and Akutagawa. Episode 11 splits between Higuchi and the other Port Mafia members earlier mentioned, then Kenji in the second half. Finally, episode 12 introduces Mori officially, and the new antagonist, the Guild. Most of the episodes can be watched in separate pairs in no particular order. I should know since I've done this many times before, and the plot honestly does not get messed up because there is no continuous plot interweaving the episodes together. Yes, there can be a debated flow of order, but you won't be completely in the dark if you're to randomly jump around episodes in Season 1. The subplots force you to have to explain them each if you attempt to summarize the season, which is why saying an orphan who turns into a tiger gets adopted by an eccentric detective agency will not be a sufficient description. Season 2 at least gets a bit more connected. The first 4 episodes follow Oda, Dazai's friend, and Dazai's time as a Port Mafia executive. This is taken from the light novel Dazai in the Dark Era, so it makes sense that it is separate from the main events of Season 2, though it does introduce Ongo, who is later seen in the present-day plot. Season 2 then follows the armed detective agency and partly the Port Mafia against the guild. Many of the events can be counted as subplots again, but ultimately the season is more straightforward. An outside group of gifted searching for a book in Yokohama, and therefore tries to eradicate the armed detective agency and the Port Mafia, along with Yokohama eventually, in order to find it. Does this gloss over a lot of details? Yes, but in terms of attempting a summary, this is way better than having to summarize Season 1. In terms of subplot, it is natural for Season 2 to be more structured than Season 1, as they are smaller plots leading to a much bigger plot. We see in Season 2 that these subplots have now led to a more solidified goal and potential problem, which is the search for a special book. We know that the Guild is not the only organization after the book, but also Fyodor's group, introduced in the Season 2 finale, The Rats in the House of the Dead. Season 3 again has a lot of subplot episodes, but has some straightforward direction in the second half of the season. Just like Season 2, the first few episodes are derived from a light novel, and Chuya and Dazai's first meeting at 15 is described in 3 episodes. Episode 4 introduces Fyodor, Episode 5 returns to the armed detective agency after the events of Season 2 and introduces Katai and Akutagawa's sister Gin. Episode 6 focuses on Kyoka's backstory and Atsushi's slight moment of closure. Well, not really, but close enough. Episode 7 focuses on Fitzgerald and Louisa, and Episode 8 to 12 finally focus on Fyodor and his group versus the Port Mafia and Armed Detective Agency, and later on, Fitzgerald. Call the first 7 episodes fillers, but honestly I see their value in terms of leading up to the cannibalism arc. I don't want to get too in-depth with the manga, but I can say for sure that the subplots continue, though the book becomes the overarching aspect of the story, so I guess you can say that there has now been a sustained plot, or rather goal. But evidently, the book has not been mentioned clearly until Season 3, having briefly been mentioned in Season 2, so you cannot simply summarize Bungou Stray Dogs talking about the search for a book. I'm pretty sure that's why a lot of people complain that Bungou Stray Dog has a lot of pacing issues, and it's honestly because the series is just a long list of subplots that either make it seem like the plot is developing way too slow or suddenly too fast. In my opinion, I like to think of the subplots as like an anthology of stories, especially with the fact that all of the characters are based off of real-life authors, and it's like the author of Bungou Stray Dogs, Kafka Asagiri, created a compilation of all these authors who are now fictional characters interacting with one another in an alternate universe. Overall, I think it's part of Bungou Stray Dogs' beauty, and why it's such a unique and interesting series, aside from the beautiful character designs, but everyone knows that. It's also nice having the subplot, as they help carve out characters, and considering how many new characters are introduced in the span of a few episodes, you kinda need an episode or 2 to absorb their presence. I should probably note that there's a slight hint that, while Dazai is not the ultimate main character of Bungou Stray Dogs, it's essentially Atsushi for the main plotline, fight me if you disagree. Most of the subplots involve him in one way or another, and it is as if we are following Dazai and his influence in the series, which is why we follow different subplots. Atsushi is our main protagonist, but he's also an important part of Dazai's long-term plan, and it was Dazai who brought him into the armed detective agency, which marks the beginning of the story's eccentric events. He does have a lot of behind-the-scene moments, a few not even shown in the anime but rather in the manga. Honestly, that's just a small speculation of mine, and evidently enough, Dazai is not always in every episode, which kind of brings up shifting perspectives and how that carries the plot, but the video is getting too long so I won't elaborate on that here. In the end, it's just an accepted fact that giving a sweet to the point summary of Bungou Stray Dogs is near impossible. The closest you can get is to just bait with Season 1 synopsis, or to be more specific, the first episode, then talk about how the characters have supernatural abilities. You might be able to talk about how detectives and mysteries are involved, but honestly the cases that the armed detective agencies solve are not as highlighted compared to the other issues they face with other gifted organizations, unless the case directly involves a member of the agency. Just like the Azure Messenger case for Kunikira, or Rampo's introduction in Season 1. This slightly ties in with the symbolism regarding the organizations and etc., but again, that's for another discussion. So, with my closing thoughts, have fun still trying to find a way to explain the plot of Bungou Stray Dogs to anyone that asks. It's just a struggle universally experienced within the fandom at this point. If you somehow can though, I highly applaud you. At least in the long run, that can get people to watch the show, and that's pretty good.